Welcome back to this edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together each and every week at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, so that as you go over the river and through the woods to grandmama's house over the holidays and somebody from some peripheral part of your family, like a sister or brother, starts talking crazy talk or is wearing the Feel the Burn pin, you have some answers for them. And I mean that with all due respect, because we love our relatives and we just don't want them to make grievous mistakes. Our next guest on that, and we've been very excited to have Justin Haskins on the program. He's an editorial director, research fellow with the Heartland Institute, been on before, but he's got a great new book that I would suggest would be a terrific Christmas gift for those as we watch the riots in Hong Kong and Iran go on, and the sign saying, "Be the America Hong Kong thinks you are." His new book is called Socialism Is Evil. Not a lot of equivocation in the title. Justin, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you for writing this book and not burying the intent in some cutesy title there. I was making this point to a fella this week that these Hong Kong protests aren't over free speech or religious freedom or owning firearms or being secure. This is a Sixth Amendment riot, and I would probably hazard that even some of the high-scoring civics majors in high school can't just off the top of their head tell you what the Sixth Amendment means. But this is what socialism turns into. Socialism becomes, you're under arrest and your family will never hear from you again because you're going to a quote-unquote trial somewhere far away. These are some of the trappings of socialism. Why are we not connecting these two stories with some of this campaign rhetoric out of the presidential hopefuls?
Right. I think that's a really important question, right? Why is it that an ideology, socialism, and really communism and socialism, there isn't a gigantic difference between those two things. Why is it that this ideology, which has failed all over the world over the past century, has caused more than 160 million people to be killed, exiled, or imprisoned? Why is it that this ideology is being adopted so widely by such a large group of people here in the United States? I mean, half of all young people, 18 to 29, say they have a favorable view of socialism, and yet they don't connect the dangers of socialism, the dangers to civil liberties, and of course these socialist rhetoric that we're hearing from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and other people who are running in the Democratic Party right now for president of the United States. Why don't we see that? I mean, obviously, a big part of the problem is that our institutions here in the United States are all run by far left-wing individuals. All of public education, for the most part, is being run by people who lean in the direction of socialism. Our media, of course, our news media to a large extent, depending on what network you're talking about. Many of America's newspapers, the radio, the list goes on and on and on. Our institutions are being controlled by the socialist left, or at least by progressives, very far left progressives, at the very least. And that's a big part of it. But I think the number one reason why this is happening right now is because of this idea that Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, etc., are socialist paradises.
Yeah.
And because people have bought into this idea, this is maybe the most successful PR marketing campaign that socialists have ever conducted in the United States, convincing people that these countries are perfect little utopias and that they're socialist utopias. And because of that, they have a success story. Finally, they have a success story. After 100 years of failure, they can have a success story, and they've convinced people that we can be just like them and be successful just like them. Of course, this is a gigantic myth, and that's a huge part of the problem. We have to debunk that myth. That's one of the most important things that we who support individual liberty over the next couple of years need to spend time doing.
Is there also a mythos in this, Justin? I've talked to folks who claim that until socialism is global, until everyone is socialist, socialism can't work until there is no other option, because what happens is the inert greed of individuals will always win out, and it's an immorality, and capitalism is immoral, socialism is truly godly, and ironically, the political process that eliminates God, but their idea is that it's the one thing that keeps us from tapping into our greed and then trying to get more than the other guy, even if we work more than the other guy.
Right. Well, there is a degree of truth to that. I mean, logically speaking, if you have a system that depends on taking away people's wealth who have it, regardless of whether you think they deserve to have it or whatever, is sort of besides the point, because that's sort of a shifting target, right? At any point in time, the majority of people in society could get together and say that this person over here has too much wealth, or this group over here has too much wealth, and then decide to take it away. So the idea is that when you have a society that's built on that concept, that we're going to take wealth away from the people who have it and just give it to other people, whether they deserve that wealth or not, we're just going to give it to them, you're always going to have the risk of the people who have wealth leaving that particular society and going somewhere else where they're not going to be punished.
Right.
Now, as long as you have that problem in socialism, it's very, very difficult to enact a socialist paradise, even from their perspective, because, of course, the people with money take their money and they leave. And we've seen this happen in Europe and elsewhere over the course of the past 100 years in numerous occasions. We see it here in the United States, in fact, in many states where state taxes are too high, regulations are too high. People leave those states and they go to another state. So in the mindset of many socialists, and especially communists, who do believe in this sort of global, worldwide communist utopia that they want to build someday, there does need to be a global government of sorts to manage all of this, so that there's no place for you to escape when the majority in society decides that they're going to take your wealth from you.
Right. When You mentioned the media and its complicity, and I've worked in the media for 30 plus years, Justin, and I'd love to ascribe that they've done due diligence and have deep held convictions on this, but I know too many people in broadcasting to know that that's not true. What they're really feeling is that they're going to be part of this inner circle, which really depresses me about a lot of the media that support this, because they think somehow they're going to be on the inner circle of this great society, and they'll be part of the choosers, and they'll be part of the arbiters of all that is right and wrong, and the unwashed masses will be down there in the valley accepting it. And that, I think, is indicative of a lot of people's arrogance towards socialism. They think they're going to be the special ones, and usually it's pretty ugly when people start realizing that their comeuppance is, no, you're not going to be one of the chosen ones.
Yeah, that's actually it's a really important, great point. The history of socialism and communism is a blood-soaked history that involves lots of shifting allegiances. Because socialism and communism inevitably always fails, it always leads to economic collapse, it always leads to tyranny of varying degrees, of course, but it always leads to those problems. There has to be a scapegoat. There always has to be a scapegoat. And when that scapegoat has been slaughtered, then they move on to another scapegoat, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And so inevitably what happens is, no matter who you are, no matter how special you think you are or important you are to society, eventually they will come for your rights and your freedoms and your liberty too. And that's a really important theme that I hit on in Socialism Is Evil. It's this idea that regardless of what you might think, whatever you think is the best option for the world, whatever you think the best policies are for the world, socialism doesn't allow for minorities to have a voice. Any kind of minority, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, ideological minorities, they don't get a say. Everything is determined by the majority. And that's in a democratic socialist society. In reality, what ends up happening is the majority of people elect some tyrant to manage society, and then that tyrant never gives up power, right? That's usually what happens. But the point is, whoever is in charge, they make the decisions, and minorities don't have any choices. And over time, everybody eventually becomes part of the minority, and their rights end up getting stripped away from them, because at some point in time, your rights are going to get in the way of what is considered by the ruling class to be for the good of the collective. And as a result of that, you're going to lose your freedom, because, of course, your freedom only exists so long as it doesn't get in the way of what is considered to be for the good of the collective.
Justin Haskins is on with us, the author of the, hopefully under everybody's Christmas tree or in a stocking, Socialism Is Evil. Get it for your friends and family. Give it to college kids out there. He's an editorial director, research fellow with the Heartland Institute. But I want to tap into some of your expertise from beforehand. And I was told he was educated in Virginia, not at Virginia. So, and you can hear that coming out of the speakers there. You went to University of Richmond, and we've seen this both in the Richmond City Council and the Charlottesville City Council, arguments for reparations. And in one case, in the Richmond City Council, they brought up Zimbabwe and they brought up South Africa as indications of what we can do if we start dealing in reparations, socialist reparations. And I said, hold on a second here. And then shortly after that, Robert Mugabe passed away, the little coup that went on before that. I said, this guy was a bloody dictator who rose to power under the idea that I'm going to take all the land back from the usurpers, give it to, quote, the people, and then, whoa, whole shock, he gave it to his friends who mismanaged an economy into bankruptcy within 10 years. You covered a lot of this despotism in these African nations, and it's all based on reparational socialism, isn't it, Justin?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Robert Mugabe, who was hailed by many socialists, like many of the sort of tyrannical socialists. You saw this with Fidel Castro. You've seen this with Che Guevara, with others. There is this very bizarre fascination on the left with people who are murderers, who are terrible, terrible people. And Robert Mugabe is one of those people. Some estimates say his government killed nearly 50,000 Zimbabweans while he was in power. So 50,000 people. I mean, this is a huge, huge, massive number of people, more than 10 times the number of people who died on September 11th.
Yep.
No one should be using his government as an example of the way we should be behaving. But the idea, the concept of reparations is actually very socialistic, and it's full of all of the problems that we've talked about with other issues related to socialism. The idea is that we're going to take wealth away from some people and give it to other people on the basis of whatever it is. In this case, it's some past injustice that may have occurred. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to solve injustice by creating injustice. You're trying to fix racism by using racism. Right. That's how socialism works.
Yep.
You never solve the problem that exists in socialism. It's really amazing. Socialists believe the entire problem with society is that some people have too much power and wealth, and we're going to take that power and wealth away from them, and we're going to give it to the government. Well, that means the government has too much power and wealth. So all they're doing in their own mindset is trading one tyrant for a more powerful tyrant, except this time the more powerful tyrant has guns and tanks and can throw people in prison.
Justin, all right, you've sold me. I want 6 copies, and I want to send them to a lot of my relatives in California. But the reason I brought up Mugabe and some of this is you hear this from Bernie Sanders, you hear it from Elizabeth Warren. I'm going to go get the money from these people. I'm going to go get it, as if they're going to be the arbiter of who deserves to have the fruits of their labor left for them or not confiscated by the government. But we have about 10 minutes left, and I always save these big questions for too late in the program, so I'm going to try to do this here. Let's go beyond this. Socialism is Evil is a great title for the book because I think a lot of the left are pitching it as good, as the healing of our national wounds. But let's talk, spend a little time about the siren song. I refer to it as Munchausen's by government syndrome. So the government, the leftists in the government, even the Republicans, have created out of places that are really devastatingly poor with very few job opportunities. And then they swoop in and say, hey, how about socialism? And the poor people say, well, crap, if it means I'm not going to be so poor, or at least I won't feel that way because everyone's as poor as I am. I'm in with that. It seems like there's a siren song that we're trying to fight back on, bailing against the tide, maybe, of telling people who have been in poverty for 2 or 3 generations now since the, quote, war on poverty began. Talk about how we, as people who believe in opportunity and the ability to make your own way and even outstrip anything you could even imagine if you're industrious, how do we make this case for somebody when the siren is out there singing about everyone will have the same and no greedy oligarch will keep your money from you?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. We don't talk enough. Those of us who support individual liberty, we spend most of our time talking about how bad the other side's ideas are, why they're not going to work, why they're going to make things worse. In many respects, we're very negative when it comes to the minds of many people, right? Because when they hear us talk, they're always hearing us talk about problems, and that's what we've done up to this point in the conversation. The reality is, however, that I like to call it the gospel of liberty, the good news of liberty and freedom, is that freedom has unleashed more prosperity and innovation and a better quality of life than any other system that has ever existed in the history of humankind, ever. And it is literally right now, while we're talking about enacting socialist programs here in the United States that have been tried and failed in other countries around the world for 100 years, there are countries that are moving in the opposite direction, away from socialism, countries like India and even to some extent China, although China has a lot of problems. They're more free market now than they were in the 1960s, for instance. Yeah. And as a result of their moves away from those things, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted from poverty. Hundreds of millions of people. In India alone, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted from abject poverty. And it's very likely that if India continues moving in that direction, because of their population growth, they have a gigantic advantage over China in terms of population growth because they didn't have a one-child policy enacted on them or imposed on them by a socialist government. As a result of that, when you mix population growth and a hungry, somewhat educated, depending on what part of the population you're talking about, society, India has the potential to become the most powerful force in the entire world over the next 50, 60, 70 years if they continue embracing free market reforms in their society. It's not perfect, but hundreds of millions of people have been lifted from poverty because of their embrace of entrepreneurship and some free market policies and free trade and things like that. And even here in the United States, if you look at the history of the United States, people are healthier, wealthier, more successful today than they were 100 years ago. It's not even remotely close. The poorest people among us in society today walk around with supercomputers in their back pockets, smartphones, with access to the internet where they can learn literally anything they want at any time they want. We have endless sources of entertainment. We have people are not starving in the streets. We have a very safe, successful society. In fact, just over the past 20 or 30 years, America has become a much safer place as well. And so things have gotten incredibly, much better over the past even just few decades here in the United States for everybody in society. And it's a result of our free market pro-liberty system. That does not mean that we don't have problems. We still have huge problems that we need to deal with. But the way to deal with that is to go back to the strategies that made us successful in the first place, embracing individual liberty, embracing diversity, embracing free market ideas, allowing people to be entrepreneurs, not holding people back. If we do that, we will unleash unprecedented prosperity, and we will see people move out of poverty and into prosperity in a way that we haven't seen because we've had too many government regulations, too many vested interests, too many crony capitalists working with government to put their boot on people's necks. We can fix those problems, but the way to fix those problems is not to give all of our rights and power to the federal government. That's not going to fix the problem. These people are completely incapable of managing anything, including the post office, Amtrak, etc. And so we need to move away from that strategy and toward a strategy where we're embracing individual liberty. And we as conservatives need to explain to people the benefits of that system. It is a real, true benefit to have freedom. It means something. And unless we are passionate about it, and unless we talk to people about it, and unless we evangelize people with that good news, we are not going to be successful.
Justin Haskins, editorial director at the Heartland Institute, but more importantly, the author of the hot hit for Christmas gift giving, Socialism Is Evil. You can get it at Amazon.com, or should they go to heartland.org, or do you have a more direct site? I want to make sure you get credit for all the books you sell.
Sure. Amazon.com is the easiest and best place to get it. Barnes & Noble, any of those places as well, if you want to order it from there. But Amazon's the best, cheapest place, I think, that you can buy the book.
And you mentioned the opportunities that are out there for people. Let's not forget, and I've said this before, and we've talked about it with other guests on the show, the concept, the phrase American exceptionalism was built on the economic idea that I can associate with who I want to work for. Therefore, I'm going to work harder because I'm working for somebody I want to work for rather than I just have to work for. And as you mentioned, crony capitalism, perhaps the greater bane than socialists are the crony capitalists that want big centralized everything, broadcasting, publishing, retail, because that takes away those choices. And I think that's as big a threat to American exceptionalism as anything, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. Crony capitalism is a huge, massive problem that we have in the United States. And I think it's important for people to understand, because you hear Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they talk all the time about corrupt corporations and how they get these sweetheart deals and they do all of it. And they're right about those things. There's no question about it. They are right about that. But here's the thing. You can't have crony capitalism. You can't have it. You can't have crony capitalists running around creating all of these great deals for themselves and making it difficult for entrepreneurs and new businesses to come into markets. You can't have that unless you have a corrupt, gigantic, powerful government. That's the only way you can have that system. So what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and people like that want to do is they want to make the problem even worse by making the system more corrupt and making it more dependent on some government bureaucrat somewhere signing off on some deal, making it easier for big corporations to create these sweetheart deals with government so that they get handouts and bailouts and special tax advantages and all of these things, while some person who is just an individual that wants to start their own business is left out in the cold. I mean, they're the ones who are embracing that model. But those of us who support truly free markets, real innovation, states' rights, individual rights, we're the ones that are saying, no, let's create systems where it's easy for people to start new businesses. It's easy for anybody to pursue whatever it is that they're passionate about, for them to pursue their American dreams. We're the ones that are calling for that. It's the other side that's trying to embrace this corrupt system that we already have by making the problem even worse.
Hey, Justin, thank you so much. It has been an honor, and I really hope that this is under everybody's Christmas tree this year. And, best of luck. If you're on a book tour, let us know. I'd love to host you down here in Virginia for a book signing at some point. And thank you so much for this book, for your visit to the program and your testimony this morning. I just wanted to jump up and say amen during it, because it is the good news, and it is still there. We just need to refinish the furniture a little bit. But from the waxy buildup. You have an awesome Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks so much. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
And for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. Until next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.